So our opening words this morning will begin with a verse from the Christian Bible, from Matthew 10:16, as it relates to the preachings and teachings of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, whose legacy we are celebrating today. And the Bible verse in question is from the book of Matthew 10:16. Remember, I am sending you out as sheep among wolves, so be as cunning as serpents and yet as harmless as doves. And Reverend Dr. King's interpretation of that teaching is in his book, A Tough Mind and a Tender Heart. And here's a quote from that writing. There is another way which co-binds tough-mindedness with tender-heartedness. It is tough-minded to resist evil. It is tender-hearted to resist it with love. This avoids the complacency and the do-nothingism of the soft-minded and avoids the violence and the bitterness of the hard-hearted. So let's be tough-minded and tender-hearted in memory of Dr. King. And now we also have a practice that we invite you into our two covenants that we like to share each Sunday morning. The first one is known as the Universal Covenant, and I'm going to ask Rafa to lead that one. Can you lead it? And there are hand gestures. Please join us if you would like.
We are Unitarian Universalists, people of open minds, loving hearts, and welcoming hands. We care for the earth and one another.
I would like to share with you a story from the Reverend Dr. King's childhood, a story about how he grew up. And this is from a wonderful book called Kid Activists. It's called True Tales of Childhood from Champions of Change. And it's by Robin Stevenson with illustrations by Alison Steinfeld. There are wonderful stories in here, everyone from Mahatma Gandhi all the way to Malala Yousafzai and everyone in between of folks who have been true heroes and activists for change. This story is called Big Words, Big Changes. Martin Luther King Jr. was the voice of the American Civil Rights Movement. He emerged as a leader during the Montgomery bus boycott and helped organize the March on Washington in 1963, where he gave his legendary I Have a Dream speech. He fought for racial equality and human rights, and his activism, along with others, helped bring about the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. As a kid, though, he was just little Mike. Little Mike, the middle child of 3, living in a big house with a large garden in a middle-class black community in Atlanta, Georgia. Now, little Mike's father, Martin Luther King Sr., who liked to be called Daddy King, he was a preacher also. And his grandfather, Mike's grandfather, was as well. So when little Mike was born in 1929, both of those men prayed that this little boy would follow in their footsteps. Now, little Mike's mother, Mama King, was a school teacher, but she quit her job when she wed to raise her family. But she was a talented musician, and she insisted that all of her children take piano lessons. She was a pretty smart mom, right, Rafa? Yep. But they were not always enthusiastic about practicing. Sound familiar? One time they played a joke on their teacher. Little Mike and his big sister convinced their little brother to loosen the legs on the piano stool. When their teacher sat down, she went crashing to the floor. Oh my goodness. Martin Luther King Jr. remembered his early childhood as full of love. He later said that his life had been wrapped up for him in a beautiful Christmas package. He grew up with what he called a feeling of somebodyness, a sense that he mattered. But the larger world sent him a very different message. Little Mike, or ML, as he was later called by his initials, he lived in the American South at a time when Black people had very few rights. White people in power had created laws to keep their society segregated, which means Black people and white people kept apart. So Black people were forced to sit in separate areas on buses in the back, and they had to sit at different places in restaurants and movie theaters. They had to use separate bathrooms and different water fountains from white people, and they couldn't even swim in public pools along with white people or go to school with them at the same schools. These segregationist policies were known as Jim Crow laws. Now, growing up, ML's best friend was a boy whose parents owned the store across the street from them, and they played together every day. ML's friend was white, and when they started school, they got split up and sent to different schools. ML was sent to the school for Black children, and his friend attended the school for white children. His friend no longer came around very much, and then the boy's mother said that they had to stop playing together. Now, ML was shocked by this, but his mother, unfortunately, was not. She explained to ML the history of Black people in America. She told him about slavery and segregation, and she told him that there was nothing natural about racial discrimination. "You are as good as anyone," she said. Yet, despite the racism that surrounded them, ML and his siblings had many happy times in their childhood. They liked football and baseball. ML had a paper route, and he saved his money, and he wanted to be a firefighter when he grew up. But we know that didn't happen. Now, he knew that his parents believed in him, and he saw his father pushing back all of his life against racial inequality. Daddy King had a history of activism, as had his father before him. They had organized voter registration drives and been leaders of the Atlanta branch of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP. Now, Daddy King also resisted through smaller daily acts of life as well. For example, he would use elevators marked whites only, and he refused to ride on the city's segregated buses. He told his children to avoid supporting segregated businesses. Now, one day when a police officer came up to him and called him boy, Daddy King interrupted him. "That is a boy," he said, pointing to ML. "I am a man." Another time, ML and his father went shoe shopping, and the clerk told them to move to the Negro section at the back of the store. But Daddy King refused. "We'll either buy shoes sitting right here, or we won't buy shoes at all," he said. As they walked away, Daddy King said, "I don't care how long I have to live with this system, I will never accept it." ML never accepted it either. Like his father, he believed that all people were created equal and that segregation violated God's will. When he was 15, ML traveled to Georgia to take part in a public speaking contest, and he won. No surprise there, right? But on the ride home, the driver insisted that ML and his teacher had to give up their seats for the white passengers. Now, ML refused. The driver threatened to call the police, but ML would not budge. Finally, his teacher persuaded him to stand in the back of the bus for the long ride home, but he never forgot that incident. "It was the angriest I have ever been in my life," he wrote later. Now, ML skipped 9th grade, and he started high school early, but at first he wasn't a very good student. He was more interested in fancy clothes than in studying. Some of the other students called him Tweed because he liked to wear his fancy suits. He also liked to dance and play cards, which his father considered to be a sin. You see, ML didn't believe a lot of the things his father believed in, a lot of his ideas about religion. For example, ML did not view the Bible as literal truth like his father did. And after starting college at only 15 years old, he rebelled against those teachings. And he decided that he would rather be a lawyer instead of a preacher. That way, he could battle for African Americans' equal rights in the courtroom, like NAACP attorney Thurgood Marshall, someone he admired. But at age 18, ML changed his mind, and he decided to enter the ministry after all. He realized that he could use his position as a minister to work for racial justice. His father was thrilled. ML gave a trial sermon in his father's church, the Ebenezer Baptist Church, on Sweet Auburn Avenue in Atlanta, Georgia. This was the street that ML had grown up on, and it was a great success. Now, soon after, ML left Atlanta to attend the Crozier Theological Seminary in Pennsylvania. During his 3 years there, he studied very hard. He practiced his sermons in front of a mirror, and he developed the skills and the style that would later help him touch the hearts and the minds of millions of people. And he graduated at the top of his class. We know a lot about the rest of his history, but maybe that fills in some of the gaps of things that you didn't know about, of how he got to be the leader, the inspirational leader that he later became. So thanks for listening.
Morally, I was led to nonviolence because I felt that it was the best moral way to deal with the problem. We were seeking to establish a just society, and it was my feeling then, and it is my feeling now, that violence is certainly much more socially destructive, and it creates many more social problems than it solves. So I was led to nonviolence for deep moral reasons. And I turned to it because I felt that it was the morally excellent way to deal with the problem of racial injustice in our country.
There is no freedom, the wise man said, let justice roll down when the poor cry out for shelter and bread. Let justice roll down like a mighty stream. Oh, children, don't you get weary, walk together, believe in the dream. When the way gets rough, we'll make a new way. Let justice roll down like a mighty stream. Hatred will never drive out hate. Let love roll down, roll down. Remember, our hearts can make us great. Let love roll down like a mighty stream. Oh, children, don't you get weary, walk together. together believe in the dream. When the way gets rough, we'll make a new way. And let your love roll down like a mighty stream. When brutality threatens our daughters and sons, let peace roll down, roll down. May our voices rise up louder than the guns. Let peace roll down like a mighty stream. Oh, children, don't you get weary. Walk together, believe in the dream. When the way gets rough, we'll make a new way. And let peace roll down like a mighty stream. Step by step, one by one, let justice roll down, roll down. They can kill the prophet, but the dream lives on. Let justice roll down like a mighty stream. Oh, children, don't you get weary. Walk together, believe in the dream. When the way gets rough, we'll make a new way. Let justice roll down like a mighty stream.
I turned to it because I felt that it was the morally excellent way to deal with the problem of racial injustice in our.
Over the years of learning and growing through appreciation of the legacy of the Reverend Dr. King in and around his birthday as we celebrate today and throughout the year, I've noticed an interesting phenomenon. Many presentations, including those of our UU faith, often speak of MLK or Dr. King or even Martin, but we rarely, if ever, say Reverend King or even Reverend Dr. King. And I think that that might be related to our primary orientation of looking at this man's life through a lens of political activism and justice work, right? We revere his intellect, his speaking ability, his political savvy, his leadership skills. We appreciate his international and ecumenical outlook. But we rarely, if ever, explore the Reverend Dr. King's legacy through the roots of his Christianity. And yet, his was a life undeniably steeped in the traditions and the practice and a deep belief in the Christian path, in biblical stories and teachings and wisdom. Although not, as we heard in The Time for All Ages, not as a literal source of information, but as a source of truth, of moral seeking, a moral understanding of the universe. From his I Have a Dream speech to his mountaintop speech, all of his orations and his writings are full of biblical references to both the Hebrew and the Christian stories. Today, though, I want to focus on that one reading that I think, in a way, he took as a kind of personal mantra. Jesus' words to his followers in Matthew 10:16. An admonition that when they go out among the wolves, they must be as cunning as serpents, and yet as soft, as gentle as doves, as harmless as doves. Now, for Reverend Dr. King, that verse, that advice, that charge, translated for him into modern language to a tough mind and a tender heart, seeking justice, not being content with anything less, being tough-minded enough to see the world the way it is and also the way it ought to be, and tender-hearted enough to reject hate and violence, to strive to love one's enemies, or at least, at the very least, to see their humanity, to see the interconnections between all of us, to see the single garment of destiny that we are all bound up in, and understand, as Dr. King said, that a threat to justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. For Reverend Dr. King had a mind that was open, was able to take in the suffering and the violence that he was living in and to see a better way. Not just to dream of it, but to plan a strategy of how to get there, a cunning strategy. To understand intellectually what was needed to live in this hard world, a world in which his full humanity was being systematically denied, a world in which the full humanity of people of color continues to be systematically denied. And yet, to find some way not to hate his oppressor, to see his oppressor in their full humanity, to live in love, not hate, to allow that to be the guiding force that drew him and his colleagues into determined action. In our world today, we see examples all around us, don't we, of a hateful and toxic kind of religion. A weaponized version of Christianity that excludes, harms, and damages all of us, all of us. But as we look at these examples of toxic religion, let us never forget the deep humanitarian Christianity of a Desmond Tutu, or a Sister Joan Chittister, or a Parker Palmer, or a Natalie Bowles, or of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Let us remember and hold up in appreciation the fact that this ancient tradition, used as a tool for good, for love, and for justice, can be a powerful and potent wisdom path that has directed the feet of so many of the world's great figures. Let us not forget that. Unitarian Universalist writer Paul Razor, in his book Reclaiming Prophetic Witness, writes about how UUs and liberal Christians in general, liberal people from the liberal side of the religious world, are reluctant to use overtly religious language. They're reluctant to seem too religious. Why is that? Well, the religious right has used their explicitly conservative theologies to raise their voices in the public square for hate. And so, unfortunately, as liberal religious voices have been afraid to use that prophetic voice, that explicitly religious language. The public has come to see religious voices, religious language, and religion in general as inherently conservative, inherently toxic, inherently oppressive. And so Razor, in his book, exhorts UUs and folks of all denominations and all religions who believe in love, who believe in justice, who believe in peace, to raise their voices in a powerful way that's directed and directly coming from their deep religious convictions. Now, I'm standing right here in a sanctuary, and I can see our 7 principles all around us. I can see the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all here on my left. Respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. Here on my right, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. The inherent worth and dignity of every person. If that is not inherently religious language, I don't know what is, friends. If those are not our deeply held values, fervently held religious values, I don't know what is. And what I hear in these principles is the central importance of love. Love and justice. Now, what does all this mean then for Unitarian Universalists? In her essay in a book called Justice on Earth, her essay called Transforming Unitarian Universalist Culture, religious educator Pamela Spar talks a little bit about reclaiming this religious language, this prophetic way of being in the world, this culture of justice and love. She writes about the need for UUs to have the courage and the capacity to talk religiously about what is most important to us. She talks about this odd paradox that we are known as the people who show up to things, the people who are willing to go to marches, to go to rallies, to make our voices heard in the public square. And yet when we do show up as people of faith, we're likely not to be able to talk about these issues of justice with the power and the passion of moral and religious imperative. And she cites a variety of factors, from our religious education culture to our perhaps sometimes thin religious identity. Whatever the reason, we're often tongue-tied when it comes to how our Unitarian Universalist values inform our lives, our activism, and our work for justice. She says, one of the dimensions of diversity and radical relationship building that does not seem to get much of our attention is theological diversity. She notes our reputation for seeming comfort with theological diversity, but how far does this comfort extend? Is it contingent on not too much overtly religious talk, or let's focus on the political or practical task at hand, or some assumed underlying shared political or class identity? Interesting thoughts for us to ponder. And as we revere and celebrate the Reverend Dr. King this month and throughout the year, I invite us to remember his legacy, yes, as a great orator, as a great activist, as a supreme political thinker. And let us also celebrate and hold up his deep, convicted faith as a Christian man. Let us find inspiration in his moral voice from deep inside the Christian fold, steeped in prophetic tradition and following the footsteps of that prophet of revolutionary love, Jesus of Nazareth. And let us honor the Reverend Dr. King's wide-ranging intellect and his openness to wisdom traditions not his own, holding that paradox of a tough mind and a tender heart. As we UUs continue to study the Reverend Dr. King's legacy and the way he spoke from the deep well springs of his faith and his practice of one of the world's great religious traditions, may UUs be inspired to go deeper into our own history and religious identity, finding a language for expressing our faith so boldly and so movingly as we go out into our communities and into our hurting world to create the beloved community that Reverend Dr. King dreamed of. Or as we often say, heaven on earth. We can begin today with the Unitarian Universalist Association's 30 Days of Love campaign, which kicks off today with the Reverend Dr. King's birthday and continues throughout the next 30 days, ending on Valentine's Day. We can put love at the center of the next 30 days. You can find the Side with Love campaign, 30 Days of Love, by going to sidewithlove.org, or you can find it on Facebook on the Side with Love page, or we will also be posting it on the UU Erie Facebook page, and there will be readings, activities, online gatherings, and various resources throughout the month for you to get excited and get motivated to make love and a loving, just world the center of your intentions for the next 30 days and beyond. Let us get comfortable with reaching out to all religious people who embrace love of neighbor and love of world. And let us deepen and explore religious language of our own that expresses the way that we see the world and the world that we want to live in. Let us explore our own combination of tough minds, working for justice, and tender hearts, holding the world in love. Let's find a way to live in this world with both. We will need them as we navigate the heartbreak of this world that we are living in today. We will need more than a club of like-minded individuals. We need a movement with a bold vision like Reverend Dr. King's, that makes the vision manifest in language that is beautiful, compelling, and irresistible. The world needs our passionate commitment to that bold vision. This is no time for closed minds, and this is no time for hard hearts. As our UUA president, Susan Frederick Gray, has said many times, this is no time for a casual faith. So, my friends, I exhort you today, with tough minds for justice and tender hearts full of love, to go forth and create the beloved community. Thank you. And now, if you have lit a candle or a chalice, I invite you to extinguish yours as I extinguish the chalice here in the sanctuary, with these words by the Reverend Matty Sifantus. We extinguish this flame, but we keep its light ever in our hearts, with its message of love and justice, taking it outside these walls, outside virtual walls, to the world that we live in, until we are all together again.